This is section 1.3, midpoint and distance formula. So these are probably two of the most important formulas you're going to learn in math, so make sure that you do memorize those. So first, what is a midpoint? A midpoint is the point that divides a segment into two congruent segments. So how we would show that, say we had a segment A, C, and B was actually in the middle, it was the midpoint. To show that those two segments are congruent, we put little tick marks on those. So it shows that those are the same length since they both have one tick mark. AB is congruent, so segment AB is congruent to segment BC. A segment bisector is a point, ray, line segment, or plane that intersects the segment at its midpoint. So in this case, B is a segment bisector because it's a point that intersects. You could also have a ray that goes through a line segment, plane, all of those things. So example, point M is the midpoint of segment BW. Find the length of VM. So it shows us that these two parts are equal by these tick marks here. And we should also know that because it says M is the midpoint, so it's in the middle, so the left and the right parts are equal. So if it's the middle and they're equal, then we should set them equal so that we can figure out what X is. And now I just have an algebra 1 problem. Solve for X. So I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. So 4x minus 3x is 1x, or x minus 1 equals 3. Add 1 to the other side, x equals 4. So that's important. However, always read the directions because a lot of time in geometry, it wants you to find something besides x. For in this case, it wants us to find the length of VM. So VM is this part. It wants us to know how long that is. So we need to substitute 4 back in for x in the 4x minus 1. So I get 16 minus 1, or 15, equals the length of VM. So again, always make sure you read directions, and if you need to substitute back in, do that. Alright, so here's our midpoint formula. And it might seem like a lot. The coordinates of the midpoint are just the averages, though, of the x coordinates and the y coordinates. So remember, average, you add them up and divide by how many there are. Well, we only have 2 points. Okay, in this case, A and B. So we add the x values, and they're x1 and x2. That's just telling you have 2 different x's, and since there's only 2, we're going to divide by 2. Same with the y's, and divide by 2. So you're finding the average of those two numbers, so that's directly in the middle. So add together and divide by 2 since there's only 2. So the endpoints of RS are 1, -3, and 4, 2. Find the coordinates of the midpoint. So the x value of the midpoint is, we add the x's, so 1 and 4. So remember, it's x then y, x then y. So let's do these as the first and these as the second. So we add the x's together and divide by 2. And the y value, same idea, add the y's and divide by 2. So in this x value of 1 plus 4 is 5, and 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, or 2.5. The y value, -3 plus 2 is 1. 1 divided by 2 is 1/2, or 0.5. So you can leave them as fractions or decimals. So remember, we're looking for the midpoint M. So I'm going to write this as an ordered pair. The x value we found is 2.5, and the y value is 1/2. Okay. So the next one, the midpoint of JK is 2, 1. So they actually gave us the midpoint, my x and y. So I already have this value and this value up here. So I'm going to start out with setting those equal. The x value equals the x values of the endpoints added together divided by 2. And the y value equals the y values added together and divided by 2. So we know one endpoint, the values are 1 and 4. We don't know the other endpoint, okay, for k, so let's call those x2 and y2 that we're looking for. So we know the j is 1, k we don't know, and we know that j for y is 4, and k we don't know. So I need to solve this for x and for y. So on this one part, we're dividing by 2, so to get rid of that, I multiply both sides of my equation by 2, so these cancel out. So I have 4 equals 1 plus x2, subtract 1, 3 is my x value of my endpoint. So same thing for the y's, I'm going to multiply by 2, so I get 2 equals 4 plus the y value I'm looking for, subtract 4, and negative 2 is my y value. So again, that endpoint was called k, so I'm going to put this as an ordered pair. 3 was my x and negative 2 was my y. And that's my answer. So the other part we're talking about today is the distance formula. So the distance formula is if we have a diagonal line. If we have just a flat line like this, we could just count how many units it is, or a vertical line like this. But when it's diagonal, it's not exactly what those are, so we have to use the distance formula. So first we find the distance between the x values and square it, and the distance between the y values and square. Add those together and take the big square root. So make sure that you write this formula down. It's very important. So let's put that into practice. Find the length of segment RS. So again, distance formula. Take the x values and subtract them, adding the y values that are also subtracted from each other. So in this case, my x values are 2 and 4, so it doesn't matter what order you add or subtract them in. I'm going to do 4 minus 2. Just always be the same. So then I'm going to do negative 1 minus 3 for my y's. So 4 minus 2 is 2 squared. Negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4 squared. Remember, when you're squaring something that's negative, make sure if you are doing that on the calculator instead of mentally, you have to keep those parentheses. So 2 squared is 4. Negative 4 squared, that's negative 4 times negative 4, is positive 16. So if you don't put the parentheses in your calculator, you're going to get a negative answer. And that's not correct, because anything times itself will be positive. So then we add and we get the square root of 20, which you could approximate out. That's the approximation symbol by typing square root of 20 in your calculator. You get like 4.5. You can also leave it as square root of 20 if you don't have a calculator with you. And that's all there is. First, midpoint and distance formula. Again, make sure that you write down both those formulas. They come up a lot, so make sure you have those memorized.